the speakers?
Yes, thank you. Very briefly, the Yoruba Foundation was initiated at the turn of the millennium in the year 2000. It was initiated in London, and each year since then, on and off, we have had events celebrating the Yoruba National Day, which is the 23rd of September of each year. Where did that date come from? It came from the peace treaty that ended the Kiriji War, the Yoruba Civil War, that lasted for 16 years. The terms of that treaty read as follows: that from this day henceforth, there shall be peace, prosperity, and progress amongst the signatories, who were all the tribes of the Yoruba nation and their descendants. That is why that date was taken as the Yoruba National Day. And for the first time, yesterday and today, the Yoruba National Day has been celebrated back home in Nigeria. So this symposium is part of that celebration, where we discuss the issues concerning our nation and the way forward. That is all that I have to say at this point, but I'll be speaking later on Kiriji War and peace in Yoruba land, a new perspective. So with that, I hand you back to our controller, Jide Yanura.
Thank you, Dele. Mo fẹ́ sọ Yorùbá díẹ̀ torí Yorùbá Symposium la pè, òyìnbó la ti fi ń sọ látàárọ̀. Àwọn ọmọ Yorùbá yẹ ká mọ̀ pé ọdún ayé máa padà sí Gẹ̀ẹ́sì ìtàn pẹ̀lú òyìnbó, ṣùgbọ́n á dá ká bára wa sọ Yorùbá díẹ̀díẹ̀. Yorùbá dùn gbọ́, ó dẹ̀ dùn sọ. Àwa tá a wà ní òkè òkun, à ń rọ̀ yín, ẹ kọ́ àwọn ọmọ yín ní Yorùbá kí èdè yìí kó má kú. So, but just to give you a bit of a history of the Yoruba nation, the Yoruba people are a very, very strong people. It's very important. It's a nation. I mean, we talk about the language, but there's a Yoruba nation. It spans way beyond Nigeria as we know it. It goes into places like Benin, Togo. Even if you go to Ghana, you know, I school in the Republic of Benin, and Yoruba is a very strong language amongst the people of the Republic of Benin. You know, so it's very important for us to know that the boundary, the artificial boundary that has been drawn to make the people think that the Yoruba nation or people are constituted mainly around a section is false. Even in places like Brazil, and the Yoruba language and the nation itself transcends that. So without much ado, let me very quickly. Can I request that if you are not speaking, can I kindly ask you to please mute your microphone, just for courtesy's sake, and so that we can have a focused set of deliberation. My name is Jide Yanura. I have been involved in with Dele Ogun in the Yoruba, what we used to call the Yoruba Foundation. Very, very pleased to be a Yoruba person, and I'm pleased to be your host this afternoon. So let me very quickly introduce to you the speakers today. We have Mrs. Kemi Atijoson, who is managing director of a London-based food consultancy company called Eagle Solution Services. She is president of Egbe Omoikale in the UK and in Ireland, a member of Yoruba Foundation, and a teacher of Yoruba language and culture. Welcome, Mrs. Kemi Atijoson. We have Dele Ogun, historian, author, and lawyer. is the chairman of the Yoruba Foundation and the convener of the of the Fatherland Group. We might speak to you later on about Fatherland Group at some point if time permits us. Dele is going to be speaking on the international dimensions of the Kiriji War and peace. We have Seyi Adefison, who, although is a chartered surveyor and not an historian, he's going to be speaking on some of the things, history and the heritage of the Kiriji War that is very dear to his heart. Then I have Boyega Adejumo. Boyega Adejumo was born in Ibadan 58 years ago, so very young man, if we say so. He attended Ibadan Grammar School and the University of Ife, which is now the OAU. We have Dr. Olade. He's a senior lecturer in strategic management at De Montfort University in Leicester in the UK, where he also holds the post of the faculty head of research students training for the Faculty of Business and Law. And then Olamide Akinwuntan, who is a medical student at Imperial College School in London. And she's going to be, she holds a BSc in clinical medicine with management from the Imperial Business School. And as you say, she has a very keen interest in the role of identity among Nigerian youth. So you will agree with me that we have a formidable panel here who will be presenting papers, and they will be engaging you in a series of what I would describe as intellectual artifacts. So please be relaxed, listen, and at the end of the session, there will be around about a 45-minute session where we will be able to take questions and answers from you. So without much ado, let me first quickly introduce the first speaker, who is Mr. Seyi Adefison, who will be talking about the role of Ife in the Kiriji War. Mr. Adefison, over to you. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. I'm quite honored and privileged to be invited to talk today on this very vital topic. A lot have been written and said about the Kiriji War, so I'm not going to go into too much of the details of the background, but basically I want to focus on the aspect of the war as it played itself out.
Obviously, this is not as we have seen previously, and as you rightly say, businesses have tried.
Sorry, are you?
Please.
Yeah, so basically I want to give the narrative from Ife perspective of the Kiriji War. So basically, the war that started in 1877 thereabout was a build-up to a series of events. And at the onset of the war, Ife was not involved. The Ife role was more of, how do you call it, a conciliatory role. They were trying to be like a mediator between the Egesha and the Ekiti Parako and the Ibadan forces. However, event quickly overcame that particular posture that Ife took. And this, there were two significant events that happened. The first was the fact that the Balogun of Ife that later became the Oni of Ife, Oni Ayikiti, was killed together with a number of his troops by poison. I think the river was poisoned. There was a version of the story that suggested that the river where they were camped were poisoned. And there was another version of the story that came up with the information that it was the horse that he was riding that was poisoned. And there was a taboo that was built around the fact that the Oni must not fall from the back of a horse. And if he did, the consequence would be death. So at any rate, Ayikiti died the following day after he sustained the injury from the poisoning. And then the pace of the war quickly escalated within Ife. And Ife was still kind of like playing a mediation role, but at that point in time, it was becoming very clear that Ife needed to be on the side with Egesha, because the common boundary that Ife shared with Egesha, they needed to be able to support with each other. So while the war was going on, there was another commotion on the eastern flank of Ife, which is Ondo. Geographically, Ondo is situated to the east side of Ife, and there was already a breakout of the war that occurred there. So the leader of the Ife camp then was a prince called Prince Derin Ologbenla. He was later to become the Oni of Ife. And he was called upon to come to the rescue of the problem that was taking place in Ondo. As it would happen, the invitation was sent to him by the Ifa priest that by the name Ajibike, the person's name was Ajibike. This person used to be an Ifa consultant to one of the previous Oni of Ife, Oni Abewela, and he was also the same consultant on Ifa matters, ritual consultant to the Oshimawe of Ondo, Arile Kolasi. Anyway, so what then happened was that when the internal riot to remove Arile Kolasi, the Oshimawe of Ondo, when that started, the Ajibike man, who was the common friend that the two of them had, sent a message, an emissary to Derin Ologbenla, who was already at the war front, the Kiriji War front in Egesha. So as a result of which, Derin then moved his troop from Elisha to Ondo. However, he didn't go straight to Ondo. He just camped on the outskirts of the town within a very thick forest, the area that is now called Okeigo. And from there, he was able to launch an attack to rescue the situation in Ondo. Unfortunately, the Oshimawe had already been killed, but he was able to quench the riot and bring everything to normalcy. So that was the first significant part, which is the death of Ayikiti, and which brought about the involvement of Ife. The second one was the fact that when Ibadan was moving their troops, and they have been blockaded by so many fronts, so they wanted to march through Ile-Ife in order to gain access into the war front in Ilesha. Because if you can imagine geographically, in order to get to Ilesha, you have to get to Ife first. And in order to get to Okemesi, where the war actually started, you needed to have cut through Ilesha. So there was the need for Ibadan troop to move through Ife land in order to gain access to Egesha. Unfortunately, the Ibadan troop were denied permission to, pass through Ife, as a result of which an attack was launched against Ile-Ife. So Ife was defeated, and there was another camp, the Modaike camp, who had already aligned with the Ibadan forces. So what then happened was that the whole of Ife became occupied, and Ife town was pushed outside to the boundary to a place called Ishoya. Ishoya is on a route map towards going to Ondo town. So, however, Derin Ologbenla continued to remain in his camp in Okeigo, which is the village between Ondo town. It was a village then, now it's a big town, between Ondo town and Ile-Ife. So, and from that point, he was able to effectively defend Ife as well as Ondo. So it was a situation whereby the Ibadan troop would have needed to go through Ile-Ife in order to launch an attack, and then they needed to launch another attack from Ondo, and Ondo town itself was already been established as an alternative trade route. So it was quite important for the entry from Ondo town itself to be well guarded. Otherwise, that could have a significant impact on the outcome of the war. And this was effectively handled by Prince Dere Ologbenla. And as a result of which, even while he was still fighting the war, he was actually elected as the new Oni of Ife. But because he was so busy with the all the activities, his activities in the war front, was not able to assume his throne as the Oni. He chose to remain in Okeibo and all the surrounding villages. So up to today, you will see a significant population of Ife people in places called Okeibo, Ifewara, Ifetedo. They are all within the same conurbation within the forest that has now emerged to become a very big, massive town. So a portion of this stretch of land is now carved into Ondo State, where places like Gari Jolode, Ifetedo, was featured prominently as part of the war front during that period, still remain part of Ile-Ife today. So yeah, so that's just the synopsis. In terms of overall essence of the war, the way I look at it, the interpretation of what has happened, I believe that it was an economic war, parties fighting within each other to take control of the economy of the land, because it started with the Ajele that was killed in Okimesi. The Ajele were there to collect taxes and, in form of goods, slaves, money, and then make returns to Ibadan. So, and then there was the need to be able to control the trade route. Ibadan was already blockaded because the trade route that they have from Kaba were blockaded from the north in Ilorin. The one that they had with Egba had been blockaded because Egba was already refusing to allow them to go through. Ijebu wanted to play neutral, and so they would not allow anything to pass through their land. And so that was the entire picture of what presented itself within the war situation of Kiriji. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that very, very beautiful summation. Any questions, very, very briefly, if there's any point within his that we want him to clarify before we move forward, or should we wait until the Q&A session? Okay, all right.
I think we should wait to the Q&A.
Okay, so let's go on to the next speaker. Doctor, actually, I think I've been corrected. It says he's now associate professor. Is that correct? That is Sheun Kolade. So he's no longer a senior lecturer. He's actually moved up and is now associate professor. So you have the floor. Kindly present your paper. Thank you. You can unmute yourself now. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Yanewura, for your good work. And I want to begin by first thanking my good Egmont here, Mr. Adeliogun, for organizing this event. I'm also glad to see another of my Egmonts here, Mogaji Wega Adejuma, who is part of the panel. I can also see one of our big aunties here, Dr. Dosuma Wolowo here on the call. So it's great to have this, and I want to thank Mr. Shia Adivision for his opening remarks, which are quite insightful about this historic event of quite 2 centuries ago. My contribution will be about the strategic direction, what I think should be the strategic direction for the Yoruba nation. So I would leave, much of the commentary on the historical, event to the likes of Mogaji and Mr. Adeliogun. But before I do that, I just want to offer a quick reflection on my own, of course, understanding of this event in the 19th century. I think one thing that struck me here is that the time we had these international wars, among various groups within the Yoruba nation, was also a time of great upheaval in terms of external threat to the integrity of the Yoruba nation. We have, the jihadists who have taken over Ilorin and been a continual thorn in the flesh for the nation. We do remember, that one of the expeditions, to retake Ilorin, suffered great bad reverses earlier on. But we also remember that the Yoruba War in 1840, in which the Ibadan Warriors, play a great and brave role in stopping the onslaught of the jihadists. And it's become a stuff of legends where you have, footmen, stopping, the jihadist cavalry in their tracks. So all of this is interesting because this was a time, and I think this is one of the lessons that is important for us to draw. As much as we reflect on the fact of the history, I think we also are drawing the lessons. That this was a time you expect that the various groupings within Yoruba land will be incentivized by the sheer danger of external threat to the nation, that they will come together. But rather what we saw was this, splintering and these wars, internal wars within the nation. And I think it's a lesson for us to reflect then on what are the things that we can learn so that we forge a new direction in which we bring all our different peoples together, no matter what the differences are. We have a common history. We are shared, the same cultural, and social history. And we, share the same aspirations for the future. And this should be the driving force, the incentive that drives us to move forward. So that's my reflection on that. And that's part of what underpins, my own contribution here. But what I'll be speaking to, and of course, that matters of strategy, there's only so much you can see on here. So I'm going to be a bit sparing and just, addressing myself to those things that we can, of course, discuss, in a public forum like this. And so what I offer then is what I call the Yoruba, strategic diamond, if you like. And there are four, elements or four pillars of that. And the first one is what I call that the Yoruba nation needs a transnational strategy. Part of the tragedy of the colonial, experience is that you have these artificial boundaries that disrupt the natural evolution, of the development of the Yoruba nation state. And so what you have here is this, artificial, geography that has actually upended, the natural contiguity of the Yoruba, nation. So you have nowadays, sometimes people think of Yorubas as just in terms of Southwest Nigeria, or in terms of Nigeria, maybe, of course, part of North Central. But I'm urging that first and foremost, we need, as Yorubas, as we look at it, we need to embrace a transnational strategy. We need to jettison this limited and limiting view of the Yoruba Commonwealth by considering the fact that, Yoruba land is not just about Southwest, it's not just about, North Central Nigeria, it's about, indigenous Yoruba communities like Mr. Yanura also alluded to earlier, in places like Benin Republic, in Togo, in part of Ghana. We are not talking of immigrant communities, we are talking of, indigenous communities here. So that is a key part of this, transnational view of Yoruba Commonwealth. The other part is the enormous number of Yorubas in the diaspora. Some of them as a result of historic of the transatlantic slave trade. So you have communities in places like Jamaica, Trinidad and Tobago, particularly Haiti, but also, large communities in Cuba, in Brazil, and so on. We need to have a focused and targeted, strategic, agenda that seeks to engage actively with these communities I mean, not just a kind of lip service, not just on the surface, you know, a focus and strategic agenda to engage with them, to embrace them, to co-opt them, to harness, you know, these enormous, you know, economic and human and cultural capital that are resident, you know, in these indigenous as well as diaspora communities, you know, across the world. And this is important because, I mean, I'm reflecting on the fact that in 1948, in January 1948, when David Ben-Gurion, who was then, you know, the leader of the Jewish Council, as it was called, then sent Golda Meir, who was the secretary of that council, to the US to raise funds. It was in recognition of the existential, you know, challenge faced by the Jewish nation at that time. And by the time Golda Meir returned in March 19, she returned with 25 million US dollars. And this is what Ben-Gurion said about it. He said, someday when history will be written, it will be said that there was a Jewish woman who got the money which made the state possible. So, I mean, of course, I recognize that at the moment, you know, we are not really talking not necessarily about secession or anything like that. We're talking about self-determination. So, this argument does not rely on just, you know, a secessionist agenda. We're talking about self-determination, which is the fundamental article in the United Nations. And I'm saying that we have enormous resources, human, economic, and cultural capital in our transnational, you know, the diaspora community that we are not even tapped into at all. I mean, this is a big market in its own, but also there's a lot of things there in terms of tourism opportunities and so on and so forth that can actually spearhead, you know, economic transformation in the Yoruba Commonwealth. I try to use the word Yoruba Commonwealth in order to move away from this, you know, confining, you know, view of Yoruba only within Nigeria, because it's more than that. The second point I'll quickly make is that in addition to this transnational strategy, we also need an aggressive human capital campaign. And I say that because my view is that the biggest battle that we face as a people is not a battle for lands. It is not even a battle for political power. It is a battle for the minds and hearts of people. For every Yoruba who is half educated or uneducated, who has acquiesced, you know, to this, you know, status of being viewed as second-class citizens. For everyone who has that mindset, you know, they represent actually a danger, you know, to our collective aspiration. The minds of our people have long been abused, and we need to embark on a program, on a campaign of reconstructing, of regaining the minds of people to make them believe, you know, on a future in which they are not playing the second fiddle, but they are first class, you know, people in their own right. And so what we need then is an education as well as a re-education campaign that not only open new pathways to knowledge, but also raises and nurtures the consciousness of our people to believe again about what they can be and what we can be collectively. So that is the second part. You know, we need to embrace that strategy of human capital, you know, campaign, raising consciousness. The third one is what I also consider to be urgent, an agrarian revolution. I think right now, majority of us Yorubas, whether in the diaspora or in various urban centers, you know, in Nigeria and beyond, we actually think of our rural communities as a kind of a footnote, as on the periphery of our economic agenda. And that is a fundamentally mistaken notion. Not least because land is a critical resource, of course, an important factor of production, but also because, you know, in these rural communities exist enormous possibilities in terms of what can be in terms of how, through the use of innovation and technology, we can capture more value, from our agricultural output. I mean, I have conducted research on this for many years, but I'm not going to belabor that because of time. But we can actually raise the productivity of our land by as much as 1,000%, and I'm not making that up. That is 10 times the value of output that we have there at the moment. And when we empower the farmers and people in our rural communities, that is also the most effective way to frontally, address the challenge, the security challenge of, of terrorist headmen who have laid siege, to our rural communities. The fourth and final element of this is also linked, to the agrarian reform, is what I call, an ambitious innovation and industrial strategy. And I think the more we use innovation to drive, agricultural reform and in that sector, the more you're going to see, because you're going to require less labor, if more technology and less labor, and the excess labor can then be co-opted to service other aspects, the non-agricultural aspect of the industrial economy, in terms of manufacturing, services, and so on. So the future is also critically belong to those who are at the cutting edge of innovation and technology. I mean, we see this in a way, at that time, and I'm sure, there'll be reflection on this later on, that even in those days where, there was a battle for economic ascendancy, innovation was at the heart of this, trade was at the heart of this. In the world now, people are talking about the fourth industrial revolution, about what is called Industry 4.0 and all of that. The Yorubas need to position themselves right at the forefront of that in driving, industrial, revolution, beginning from the Yoruba, Commonwealth and beyond. And I say, finally, that these four elements are mutually reinforcing. So the transnational strategy fits into this aggressive human capital campaign, which fits, into the, need for an agrarian revolution, which fits into an innovation and industrial strategy. All of them are mutually reinforcing, and they are very, very important. So I will hold that now because of time, and hopefully we can have more conversation around that in the Q&A session. So thank you very much once again, Mr. Yanura.
Well, absolutely beautiful paper. Thank you so much. A lot to take in there. I think four key areas of interest. You spoke about the transnational strategy. You also spoke about the aggressive human capital campaign as a point. You mentioned an urgent agrarian revolution, and then lastly, you capped it up with what you describe as an ambitious industrial and innovation strategy. And I think there's a lot. If you're a student of history, the connection between all four there is what nationhood is all about, to be honest with you, is the articulation and the harnessing of an overall strategy that encompasses a people. It's about the vision, who are we, what are we trying to do as a nation, and what should we be doing to move things forward. So thank you so much for that. I thoroughly enjoyed that. And I'm sure even I have quite a few questions for you during the Q&A sessions. So thank you for that. I'm going to move very quickly to Mrs. Kemi Atijoson, who will be taking us through a paper on the linguistic case for the Yoruba nation. Thank you, Mrs. Atijoson. The floor is yours. You can unmute now as well. Okay, while she's getting ready, can I suggest that we've got two speakers so far, and there's a lot that those two speakers have actually taken us through, both Mr. Sheyi Adefiso and Dr. Sheun Kolade. And I think it would be a very useful thing. If you have your questions, please make those questions, keep them available And actually, just to save time, if you do want, you can send me those questions by using the chat function on the group, so that I can begin to collate them, and then we can have a much more structured Q&A session. Mrs. Atijosun, are you ready for us? You can unmute yourself. Okay, let me see if someone can unmute you. Let me. Okay, that is fine now.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Yanugura.
Thank you.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. I've been asked to speak on the linguistic case for the Yoruba nation. And so I'm just going to talk briefly about what it is. Why is this language so important if we're considering ourselves within nationhood? On Saturday, 30th of May, 2020, my grandchildren aged 11, 10, and 3 years hosted a virtual expo titled Discover Nigeria. In the process of their research, putting the expo together, they called me to ask a question that set me on edge. They said, "Nana, you are always teaching us about Yoruba language, but you're from Nigeria. So how come you don't teach us Nigerian?" I said to them, "What do you mean?" In chorus, the 10 and 11-year-olds said, "We mean you have not taught us Nigerian. You always talk about Yoruba. If you are from Nigeria, you should be speaking Nigerian in the same way people from Spain speak Spanish, people from Italy speak Italian, people from England speak English." So I said to them, "But Yoruba is one of the Nigerian languages." They said, "Nana, you're confusing us. You already told us about Yoruba, but we are asking you about speaking Nigerian." From that moment, something was triggered inside of me. I have been involved and active in the celebration of Yoruba National Day since year 2000, but nothing has challenged me in the way my grandchildren's question challenged me about my Yoruba identity. As a Christian Ikale woman in Yoruba land living in the UK, I'm passionate about my identity in Christ, created in the image of Almighty God, as an Ikale person within the Yoruba nation. I believe my Ikale dialect helps me to understand my Yoruba language that links me with all other groups within Yoruba land, be it the Egbas, Ijebus, Ondos, Ekiti, Oyo, Osun, Ibadan, Owo, and many other groups within Yoruba land who speak this common language that binds us together wherever we are in the world. The Yoruba language in Nigeria is one of the biggest language groups in the country and in the two neighboring countries of Benin and Togo. The Yoruba tribe is one of the biggest populations within Nigeria. And I'm sorry I use the word tribe there because that is something that seems to stick in our head. We're actually not a tribe, we're a nation. And amongst migrant populations in the diaspora, and I was glad that my brother, Mr. Kolade, referred to us having a transnational outlook because of Yoruba people who are scattered in the Caribbean, in the Americas, and here in the UK. And just to remind us that the Yorubas are the 34th largest group of people in the world. The first regulations and rules for the Yoruba writing were invented in 1884 when Bishop Samuel Ajayi Crowther translated a copy of the Bible into this language for the first time. Yes, we were speaking the language, but it wasn't written down in the way that we have it today, and we are able to teach it and share it and recognize it. National language is a driving force behind unity of the nation's people, and it makes them distinct from other nations, provided, of course, you give your language the respect that it deserves. And giving respect to your national language means that it should be our primary language, as well as the preferred source of communication. As you all know, we all speak English now because we've been told that that is the lingua franca. But I know deep down inside me that when I'm speaking, because Yoruba was my very first language, in fact, Ekale was my very first dialect, most of what I say, I'm translating that language in my head as I speak. I translate, and then, and no wonder many of us in the diaspora, we have problem with our younger generation who have grown up here and understand the language, because when we're speaking, we're translating our Yoruba language into English to speak to them. And so they pick holes in what we say. Language is intrinsically tied to our identity, and this often includes the identity of a nation. The relationship between language and a nation is a fundamental one, and as language is often used in the very creation of nations, the idea of a nation has been legitimized through history, partly on the basis of its citizens sharing a common language. The ability of language to create instantaneous, even blind unity is a very, very unique one. The idea that language is central to any bid to invoke nationalism appears to have become naturalized. And more often than not, language is offered as a defining and singular trait of a group. It is what makes it worth setting them apart. Minority ethnic groups in larger countries who seek independence and autonomy within a state of their own almost always draw upon linguistic differences that exist between them and the majority. Descent, history, culture, and religion are forgotten in these inter-ethnic conflicts based upon language. And just as language can be used as a means of bringing people together in peaceful circumstances, it can also become the forefront of a rebellion. Language has the power to mobilize the masses. An example is Ireland and the Irish independence movement. Douglas Hyde and the Gaelic League envisaged an Ireland that would be wholly liberated from British rule and everything that had been imposed onto the Irish people. This included separation from English, because a pillar of the Gaelic League's principles was that Irish liberation could under no circumstances take place through English. Hyde and the movement aimed to revive the daily use of Irish among the population, a population of which only 0.8% was monoglot Irish speaking at the end of the 19th century. A similar sense of revolt can be seen in the process and plea under which the former Soviet Union split into the nations that exist today. The transition from a communist empire into 14 distinct nations relied on the recognition of differences and individuality. Linguistic and cultural liberation within such nations required that nationalism be the route to self-determination, whereas native languages had previously played second fiddle to Russian and the official language of the Russian Empire and the USSR. As Russia lost its supraethnic identity, these countries united by one language and one system gained opportunity to change the linguistic balance and strengthen their titular languages. However, the Russification has not been a smooth process due to the large populations of monolingual Russians in these countries. Language is a multifaceted power. It can unite, it can bind, it can dissolve, separate, and sever. But most importantly, its contribution towards national identity cannot be dismissed. Language is a marker of natural and cultural identity. In Ukraine, there were debates over speaking Russian or Ukrainian. Hebrew was revived to become the primary official language of Israel. In the UK, there was fear over English changing as more immigrants moved into the country. And now, as you're probably aware, to be granted citizenship in the UK, you have to demonstrate your grasp of the English language. So despite the decline in Yoruba speaking, as we have come to adopt the English language so much to the detriment of the Yoruba language, the majority of Yoruba people still take pride in their language and their culture, so much so that wherever you meet Yoruba people, our distinct way of dressing, socializing, interacting becomes the envy of those around us. And although sometimes it's a source of irritation, as we too can quickly dominate the atmosphere. When people feel deprived, robbed, and oppressed, their language and culture become rallying instruments of resistance to set a course for liberation for their race and for a better future for their children and grandchildren. It is no different for the Yoruba people. Yoruba people already have the advantage of a common language, population size of over 50 million, high level of literacy rate, entrepreneurship, educational development, a sense of pride and dignity, a culture and value system that encourage individuals to strive to achieve their God-given potential. So it is difficult to see how the Yoruba people will continue to allow themselves to be marginalized and terrorized into submission in the short, medium, and long term. Yoruba nation will have to emerge within or outside of the Nigerian state as currently designed. However, we Yoruba people must continue to be proud of our language. We must learn to teach our children our language wherever we are. We must not be ashamed of our language because it's our symbol of unity. It's what differentiates us from the Russian, from the Italian, from any other nation. And if we must be a nation, the unique advantage of being able to speak the same language is a very, very big plus. We can see that even after more than 300 years of political union of Great Britain, Scotland and Wales, they are still striving to be their own people, to have self-determination, despite all the development that is perceived by the rest of the world to have been achieved. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mrs. Atijoson. I think your paper is absolutely essential. I think one of the immediate character that identifies a people is the language. And I think the three key, whether it's nation, nationalism, and language, they're so connected. You cannot have a nation without having a language, because a language is what collectively defines a people. And nationalism, therefore, is based on the broad understanding that a people who have a common understanding of whatever it is that binds them together. And some of the things I took away from your paper, I think, is that language sets the people apart. Is that we need to try and understand that even when we communicate with our children who are in the diaspora especially, and those that we speak English to, that we also need to know that as adults, when we speak in a language that is otherwise our own native tongue, there is something that goes on in our mind, in our brain, which is translation. we translate it without knowing into mother tongue and then bring it back again so that we can then communicate it to our children. And oftentimes the meaning is lost in that translation. So I think it's a very, very important one. You did say something about pride of English over Yoruba has become one of the things that we need to fight as a people, and I totally subscribe to that. So thank you so much for that unique contribution. I'm going to go on to the next speaker, and I think I also have quite a few questions for you when we go to the Q&A session, Mrs. Ati-Johnson, so I'll let you know. We're going to go on to our next speaker now, who is Olamide Akinwuntan. Olamide will speak to the Yoruba futures. She'll talk about a new generation of perspective, what the newer or the younger generation of Yorubas either are looking forward to or are contributing to the Yoruba nation. So Olamide, the floor is all yours. Thank you. I think you're muted, so you can unmute yourself.
Okay, thank you.
Excellent.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm really honored to be in this symposium, and even more honored to have been asked to lend my voice to such a gathering. Though I am young and I have much to learn, I hope that my short speech will give some information of value. I am the daughter of a Yoruba father, an Ife man, and an Edo mother. Although my dad grew up in Kainji, his father is from Ife and his mother is from Ekiti. I'm proud of my heritage of being Yoruba. My name, signals to anyone who knows about Yoruba people that I am Yoruba. Unfortunately, when I introduce myself, the next sentence is, Shobo Yoruba, and I have to say no. Which makes me very sad. And I was really happy that Mrs. Ati-Johnson spoke about the need to preserve our language. In my speech, I'm just going to talk about youth perspective in terms of ways that I think you, as our elders, can help to promote this idea of the Yoruba nation. Because at the end of the day, the Yoruba identity is fading. Many of my counterparts have either grown up in the diaspora or been educated there. We interact with people who are not necessarily largely Yoruba. We tend to speak English at home, in our Western institutions. In fact, I speak French more fluently than I speak Yoruba, and I have friends who speak Japanese, Spanish, all better than they speak Yoruba, which I think is not great for the future of the Yoruba nation. One of the things I think that we can do better is networking. And when I say networking, I mean a breadth of things. We can start to sensitize my generation to the history of our people through events that are aimed more at younger people. And this will help to inculcate our pride in who we are, because we can only be proud of who we are if we know where we're from. And we will also begin to view each other as brothers and sisters beyond our immediate or extended families, not just for government contracts, but actually to form a social network of support with each other, with whom we can work towards common goals, not just politically, but in arts and in science, for self-determination as a people. With the advent of things like social media and virtual meetings, especially with the surge in such technologies in this pandemic, there's really no excuse not to have these initiatives in place. The next thing I think is education and scholarships. In many developed countries, there is a system by which the government, or at least the elite tier, seek to educate members of that nation, because not everyone will be able to afford an education. And what you do when you do that is actually you instill gratitude to the young people, because while they're receiving that education, they have this sense of the community has paid for this. And they are far more likely to want to give back to the community when they leave. Companies do this when they pay for PhDs and MBAs for their workers. In my first year at uni, I met some girls from Trinidad who had had their education at Imperial paid for by their government. And of course, the second they finished at Imperial, they moved back home with that education and with those skills to take home. So think of it as an investment in our future. And not just in Western education, but actually we can invest in scholarships to improve education in things that are central to our culture. We can pay for people to be trained in fabric dyeing, in blacksmithing, in farming, in roadworking, in house building, not just English and maths. And I mean, those things are important, but you know, community is not made up of just mathematicians and professors. The next is the language. I won't speak too much on it because Kemi has definitely spoken far better than I can. But yes, it will help to preserve the culture. A lot of available studies on Yoruba culture have actually been performed by Western agents, which is tricky because what you then have is this thing where outsiders are telling your story. And even though that's not necessarily wrong, they will always have a different agenda. You know, when you tell your story, your agenda is to recall, to recount, to preserve. Whereas when outsiders tell your story, their aim is to study. And so there might be nuances of, you know, certain stories that they will not capture. And furthermore, learning about certain stories in English may not capture certain concepts that are maybe present in the Yoruba language or Yoruba culture that are not present in English. So for example, if one of my great aunts was to sing my Oriki, I don't understand it. And even though my dad may translate it to me, the translation does not capture the poetry and the sentiment behind the song. So yes, preserving our language would definitely help to preserve what is core and what is key for, you know, for our people, for our ancestors. And while we cannot undo the legacy of colonialism, we can, you know, take the future into our hands and kind of decide that going forward, this is the direction we want to move in. Even if Yoruba does not end up being widely spoken, and I think it can, because, you know, English was not widely spoken in Nigeria, and now it is. So it's definitely possible. But even if that were to not be the case, it is still important, I think, to preserve it for historic and academic merits. The same way Latin is not widely spoken as a language, but there are many people who speak Latin fluently. So that as more is learned about the history of those people, of this nation, there remain a group of people within our community who have the understanding to translate and apply those, you know, ancient wisdoms and lessons to our current scenario. And I fear that as, you know, as I grow older, we will soon have a generation where actually no one can speak Yoruba. Yeah, and included in this about language should be an acceptance of our traditional religious and spiritual beliefs as a lens through which we can understand our culture. That is not to say that everyone should begin to, you know, practice the traditional religion. That's everyone's choice. But I think a movement away from this fear of what is ours as demonic and scary to just an understanding of it as a different way by which people may choose to access their spirituality. And religion is very tied to culture. Many religions and their practices are tied to the culture of the people with whom that religion originated. And so by understanding and looking at the religious and spiritual beliefs of our ancestors, we can gain a greater appreciation of what was actually held valuable in traditional Yoruba society moving forward. The last thing I'll talk about development. There's a lot of interest in moving back among the diaspora. Things like the racial tensions in America and in England have caused a lot of young Black people to really think about, you know, where am I from? And increasingly you have young Africans who are moving back to Ghana, moving back to Kenya, moving back to Rwanda, moving back to Nigeria. And in that, there's a tremendous opportunity for the Yoruba nation. Most of the financial power still rests in the hands of your generation, not mine, because we're still young, just entering the workforce. And I would like to ask that as you consider the things in which you invest, try to think about ways in which those investments can be channeled into the building of the Yoruba nation. So not just Lagos, because Lagos really is now a city that belongs to everyone. But think about what you can build in Osun State. Think about what you can build in Oyo. Think about what you can build in Ekiti. Think of what you can build in Ondo. Think about what you can build in Brazil. You know, estates, schools, factories, things that will motivate people to move back to those places, things that will motivate young people to settle in those places and develop them. Speaking of investments in the private sector, it's good to think about what we can sell to others, but I think we should first think about what we can sell to ourselves, because you cannot be exporting when you are not self-sustaining yet. So we need to think about, you know, when we think about farming, how do we grow crops that can feed us? How do we make clothes for us to wear? You know, how do we build schools for our children? When we have those infrastructures, and when you build it for yourself, you will build it well. And because it is so well and so nice, then other people will say, ah, this thing is nice, can I have some? Imperial was built for British students and they built it fantastically. And then we back home said, ah, this is a good school, let's go there. So we should have that mentality when like investing and thinking of where to put our money. As we say, as the English would say, put your money where your mouth is. It is one thing to preach for the future of a Yoruba nation, but if all your dollars, so to speak, are parked in alternate interest, then there's a mismatch between the professed goal and the actual outcome. And another thing is the role of royalty. We are a culture that, you know, has respect and places value in royalty. However, we need to think about what those traditional leaders actually do for us and do for young people. I know of the Oni of Ife, I know of the Alafin of Oyo, I know of the Oba of Lagos, but as a young Yoruba woman who is from Osun State or who grew up in Lagos, I can't point to anything that any of those leaders has done for me. Yet I'm expected to respect them. You know, I can point to more things that the state governor has done for me, as much as I don't approve of, you know, the Nigerian political system. So for these traditional rulers, I think it's very important. Some of us will know some of those rulers. Some of us here occupy those positions in our communities, to not just think of them as a title for pomp and circumstance, but to actually think in my capacity as an Otumba, as a chief, what am I doing for my people, the people around, beyond my family? What legacy, what lasting legacy am I leaving for the Yoruba people? Yeah, Yoruba culture is evolving. What it will mean to be Yoruba in 2050 will be very different to what it meant in 1950. The clothes may change, certain cultural beliefs and practices will change, and that is normal. Every culture evolves. But nonetheless, the group of people will remain largely the same. And so it is important for us to leverage our belonging to that group to create a better future, because it is through our deeds that we gain immortality. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Olamide. I think that if there's anything at all, the Yoruba nation, the identity of the Yoruba nation is called to question by the youth. The leadership of the Yoruba nation is called to question by what I've heard from you. And I think we should all take what you have spoken, the things that you have said, as those who are in leadership, those who intend to go into leadership, and think very, very closely and very hard on some of the things. You spoke about network and the need to actually provide some sort of a networking framework that allows for the youth to engage, to meet, and you even spoke about events, and it's not necessarily just political needs, for science, for other things. You touched on even things to do with trade. How do we make sure that we recognize the monies that we spend, and we spend those monies within the community. You spoke about education and scholarship, putting our monies where our mouth are, making sure that we can establish the youth with some of our resources. And again, you spoke about language, but from the point of preserving the language, again, reiterating some of the things that Mrs. Kemi Atijoson had mentioned earlier on. And to be honest with you, I think I would probably take the liberty of summarizing your paper by saying that, without leadership, there is no direction. So the challenge that you have thrown us this afternoon is that we as a people, as leaders, should really listen to you and help you to have a better navigation of what it means to be Yoruba, so that you can gain an identity, and that with that, you can also contribute your own quota to nation building. So thank you so much. A very, very interesting paper. Let me go to Mogaji Gwega Adejumo, who will speak about the constitution reform or a new constitution for the Yoruba nation. Mogaji Gwega Adejumo, you have the floor. Thank you. You're muted, so you can unmute yourself.
Yeah, I've just done that. It was not coming up before. Thank you very much, Mr. Jide Yaniwura, and my profound thanks to my brother Dele Ogun and all my friends here, and then particularly to Sister Me, Dr. Mrs. Tokunbo Awolowo for being here as well. Talking about the Constitution that should be the way of making sure that we have certain codes of conduct and the way to organize ourselves and to have a direction is a simply universal kind of quest. Those who are in the academia would say that there are two types of constitution. We have the written, we have the unwritten. They may be right in the sense that people will always exist. And I will insist that even if we want to go by science, we should start looking at the Yoruba having been in situ in this part of the world for at least 15,000 years. Science supports it. The University of Birmingham, they were here in 1965 at a place called Ihu, Eleru, very close to Akure, 24 kilometers to be precise, closer to another town called Isanu. Just about 10 kilometers into the bush there was this large expanse of caves. And inside these caves, many bones, human fossils were found, which have been successfully carbon dated to be 15,000 years old, which should make us the oldest living people in this part of the world. In fact, when you check out the map of the world that shows where they have found human fossils, it is in Yoruba land in the whole of West Africa that you will find the oldest, which simply means we've been here. Others may have come to join us, but we've been here. And being here, even the DNA of those bones are closely matched with the DNA of the modern Yoruba. And we couldn't have been here for 15,000 years without something serious to show for it. And I'll tell you something. The Yoruba or your empire lasted for 650 years, compared to the mighty Great Britain that lasted for only 350 years, 650 to 350. We sure have something to be proud about, and proud about the way we've been able to organize ourselves, to manage ourselves. Even though the Yoruba before the colonialists didn't have a written constitution, but we had our set of rules, codes, and the way we used to do things. Right from the onset, we had established technology in terms of clothing, soil, and all of this. Even silk were part of what we used to wear. If anybody should remember the song about Alaye Olugbon Laye Aresa, Laye Oba Abiodun. Abiodun lived when 1774. And the song went that Emira Koko Morano, Morekini, Babashoekini is silk, Ano is velvet. If we could be doing that way back 300 years ago, then of course we had our own constitution. We had a way of living our lives. If you check out the Great Britain without a properly written constitution, they have their own codes too. They have the Magna Carta of 1215, they have the Bill of Rights. They are homogeneous, in which case they speak the same language, they have the same culture. They may not need to have a codified a book to define who they are. So we didn't quite need it. We had our city-states, we had our Obership system, and we had the judiciary, the executive in the Alafin or the Oba. We had the legislative and the chiefs. We had the Ogboni in the judiciary, and they acted as checks and balances to each other. Even when the British came, they saw a very serious arrangement. Even after the amalgamation, the very first constitution written, which was the Clifford Constitution, had the Alafin and the Sultan as the two Africans. That is what they wrote there. They didn't even say Nigerians. The two Africans represented there. Alafin for the whole of the South and the Sultan for the whole of the North. They recognized the Yoruba as having a very structured, a very particularly technologically higher in terms of innovation, a system that was good enough in running things, in making things work. We had all of that present. The 1922 Constitution had to, at some point, give way to yet another constitution. But unfortunately, the one that came after that, the 1946 Constitution, did not quite represent the will of the people. There were so many riots. And the reason was because you are now bringing in different aspects of very diverse convergence of people to come and live together. And the Governor General then just did exactly the lazy thing of making it look like it was yet another Great Britain. It didn't provide for the different nationalities. It didn't provide for the different cultures. It didn't provide for the different religious dimensions. It didn't provide for the diversity. And there was so much trouble. There was so much commotion. That was actually the rise of the great Pawolo in lending a voice to how it will be unworkable to have a unitary type of constitution. All of that led to the 1949 conference, and then, of course, having to bring in a semblance of self-rule when Papawolo became the very first African to be given the job of running a government. It was called the leader of government business in 1951. And then the 1953 London conference, in which the Yoruba, through Papawolo, argued, and successfully too, for a federal system for this country to cater for the diverse needs, to take care of individual needs as well as collective needs, and to be able to situate the Yoruba in a proper federal structure. And that led to the Western region in 1954 having re-elected Papawolo as the leader, but this time around with the position of the premier. And we all saw all that happened between 1954 and 1959. 5 glorious years. We had everything that could make us proud. We had the Western House in London, which is now the Nigeria House. We had our own consulate everywhere. We had our own constitution. We had the Western Nigerian Constitution. We had our own flag. We had our own coat of arms. And that was what we wanted. That was what was going to help. That was what was going to propel us into greater heights. And that constitution of 1954 it gave way to yet another in such a way as to have other aspects that people felt should be included. Now, I'm saying all of this because between 1946 and 1959, we had the Macpherson, we had the Richardson, we had the Littleton, and then we had the independence constitution. We had 4 constitutions in just about 14 years or 13 years or thereabout. In which case, the question will now arise, is it going to be a whole lot of time saving and perhaps being more effective to have a new constitution drawn, other than to have to patch, to kind of amend a totally unworkable constitution? So I'll take us to the American Constitution. The American Constitution is 244 years old and it has only been amended 27 times. In fact, one of the amendments, just one, took 20 months to be able to put one amendment in place. And today we have a federal government that is telling us that we should go for constitutional amendment, and they're asking people to come and submit memoranda. And I'm going to ask, for how long are you going to be able to subject maybe 30, 40, 50 memoranda into wanting to change one aspect or the other as it suits people? In which case, how do we even begin to change the 774 local government structure? And I will explain. Lagos and Kano, of the same, in quotes, population. But we are all very, very, very sure that Lagos is bigger. I consult for the World Bank, and the last known figure we use for Lagos in what we did with RTEP, Route and Tube Expansion Program, I wrote the implementation manual for that. The population we used for Lagos was 18 million in year 2000. Now, if Lagos was 18, what exactly was Kano when Kano had Katsina and Jigawa in it? Now, between Katsina and Jigawa and Kano states, the local government that was 24 became 104 local governments from one state that was split into 3. Lagos, that they said had the same population, has remained 20 local governments with 20 House of Reps members into the House of Assembly, into the House of Representatives. And then the old Kano returning 104. So even if I bring a bill now and I say, okay, I bring a memorandum and I say, let's change this, who are the people who are going to vote? If we are going to have 104 from Kano, you can imagine how many House of Reps members come from the whole of the Southeast. Some of them don't even have more than 10 local governments or 11. So we are disenfranchised in the South, particularly in the Southwest. So how do we begin to change such a constitution? How do we begin to amend such a constitution? In which case, it is a useless piece of documentation to begin with. It is going to be obtuse. It's going to be useless to say we want to start to amend. The only thing we can do is to write another. And I'll tell you why we must write a proper constitution for this country. The last constitution that we had that is truly people-oriented was the 1963 constitution, which had to accommodate the Midwest in that constitution, and they still had to put some other things there. Now, the old constitution up till the year 1963 had the regions retaining 65% of their income, and that is why I will say it in Yoruba, Allah, Loma Fioko Olehon, is the meaning of what we were calling restructuring. Maybe we moved away from that now. In which case, till your land, walk your land, let me walk mine. Do not come to encroach on my land. I won't encroach on yours. Work hard on yours, make it to produce. I will work hard on mine, I'll make it to produce. And then at the end of the day, it is the yield that will determine who has worked harder. How can we now have a Yoruba land in which we have in one local government, Apapa in Lagos, we have the Tinkan, we have the Roro Port, and we have the Apapa Port itself. And between the three, they yield 67.7% of non-oil revenue to this country. And look at the road. Look at the road to Apapa. And look at what has become of the Yoruba with only one local government. VAT, 65.5%. In fact, there was a time I had to go to Channel Television to argue this out. And I did that because I'm the publicity secretary of the Yoruba Summit Group, which is the umbrella body for all Yoruba groups. That the total VAT that the Yoruba land actually supplies to the center is about 69% to 70% of VAT. And what do we get back in return? In terms of GDP, the Yoruba supply no less than 58.8% of our total GDP. The Yoruba do not even get 18% back in all of this that I have enumerated. And it's all due to a faulty structure and a defective constitution that does not give to us what is due to us. For how long are we now going to be arguing about amending such a constitution? In which case, the Yoruba Summit Group, in a communique that I brought out, faulted this idea of having an amendment. We don't want an amendment. We want a totally different kind of representation of the kind of ideas that will lead us to believing that we are not going to be treated like a second-class citizen in our own land. We are here. We evolved here. We didn't come from anywhere. The Yoruba own their land. You can't just treat them as if they don't matter. And looking at what we even give to the center, what we bring to the table, we're not even getting anything close to 1/3 or even 1/4 of what we bring. It is injustice of the Yoruba to continue with this line of structure, with this kind of constitutional arrangement that have been foisted on us. And I mean foisted. Let us look at every constitution from 1963. We had the 79 constitution. The 79 constitution, well, was initially properly constituted, but I remember Awolowo saw a lot of things wrong and decided he wasn't going to participate. But then some eminent Nigerians went and brought out something for which the military government tinkered with it and said they were going to set up a military or a federal review, in which case even if people had sat down to formulate something, now the military is coming with what? A superior kind of intellect, or they have a different kind of glasses to show some optics that they believe is better from their own perspective, to now tinker with what the people have decided. And that was with the 79. Sister Bitokumbo is here. She was part of the 1988 Constituent Assembly. And what happened was yet another tinkering of it by the Babangida regime. After all that they had said, the Babangida regime still did exactly what the Obasanjo regime did. And then it went on to this very annoying 1999 constitution, which was actually written by one person called Yadudu. And I want us to understand what I mean by that. It was the Attorney General. I think it was the one who took over from the man who took over from Oluogonorowa. We know how Oluogonorowa left. Oluogonorowa was Attorney General who left because they were bringing out decrees that he claimed they didn't know anything about. And all of this they put into a constitution that was not in any way representing anyone. And that constitution starts with we the people. When did we even have a constituent assembly in 1999? Granted, we had one in 79, we had one in 88. For God's sake, which constituent assembly produced the 1999 constitution? So I will even want the Yoruba nation to look at this critically, and even the legal angle to it. Must we accept an illegality if there is a way that this group can do this? I will be very happy. I'll be very, very happy to champion it, to talk to our lawyers and see the possibility of taking the federal government to court and challenging the validity of a constitution that was not in any way enacted into any law. about a truly constitutional process, and yet it is called a constitution. Somebody wrote it, presented it, and is with the people. There must be legal consequences. I will also want this group to take up what I had said about Ihueleru. We should be able to send people there on an expedition to go and see where our ancestors originated from 15,000 years ago, so that we can be proud of who we are. From the rivers of Niger to the upper Volta River in Ghana, that was the extent of the Yoruba Empire. The Oninana of the Ga people in Accra is a Yoruba Oba. And there is another Yoruba Oba in Ghana. We have many in Togo, we have many in the Republic. And we are not just going to be these people that will be rubbish, because we have a rich history and we have a rich constitution. What constitutes the Yoruba is our strength. Sorry, I'll round up quickly.
Thank you.
So the whole idea is that as it is, we need to make an emphatic statement. We need to say we are not involved in any amendment. What we want is a properly written constitution that will reflect all of which the Yoruba people stand for. I would have to hold on for now because I still have so much to say. I hope there will be time. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that contribution. I think lots to think about. Mogaji Boyega Adejumo. The basis of coming together for any nation is got to be either a written or an unwritten agreement upon which the governance itself is formed. And I think that your talk on the paper you presented really speaks to that. It also touched on how advanced the Yoruba people have been, even before the so-called English technology came. You spoke very eloquently about our knowledge in textiles and industries and trading. You mentioned and you touched upon a very, very key part of how the current Nigerian state is put together, and that is when you speak to the issue of revenue. You spoke about local government. Dele Ogun and I have spoken in the past, and we've spoken to a gentleman called Harold Wilson, isn't it? Sorry, my memory is gone there. And he spoke about a lot of the fraud that was perpetrated by the colonial government in the structuring of Nigeria. But one of the things, of course, that we know is that revenue allocation is based on the formula, the derivation and sharing formula is based on the number of local governments that you have. So when you spoke about Kanu and some of the parts of the north having significantly more revenues than more local governments, then it tells us that where this is coming from. You asked that perhaps we need to call for a rewrite of the constitution, and that when the word we as used in the Nigerian constitution currently, we are the people of Nigeria, there is no such we, because the we never gathered together to write the constitution in the first place. So I think that was a very, very interesting. You also spoke about a call for the group to say the group themselves, if this group could see the possibility of challenging the Nigerian constitution. I'd like to see how that is possible, because certainly whatever opinion or whatever law or that the judge or the courts would have to fall back on will be based on what is the so-called constitution that we currently run. And that would be a very, very interesting one, because it would be interesting to see how, I mean, we have the lawyers are here, and so they should be able to maybe during the Q&A sessions tell us how, whether within the Nigerian context you could bring this to bear, or whether you'd have to take it outside of the Nigerian nation or the Nigerian state to fight that battle. So thank you so much for that. I'm very mindful of time. This is 2:37 now. I'm going to go to Dele Ogun before we go to the Q&A session. But please, Dele, the floor is yours. War and peace in Yoruba land, new perspectives. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. I'm going to share my screen. So those who are not haven't got the cameras on, you may struggle to follow my presentation. I'm speaking on war and peace in Yoruba land, new perspectives. Where's this new perspective coming from? It's coming from our understanding in recent times of war, the explanation for wars, and the real reason for war. The Iraq War. We were told that it was weapons of mass destruction, were we not? But then it then turned out that there were no weapons of mass destruction. So that should tell us that there is a difference between the explanations that are often given for war and the real reason for the war. Those of us who studied history abroad were told that the First World War, that the reason for the war, the cause of the war, was the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand in Sarajevo. And that is what led to the catalyst that now sets off the First World War, into which everybody else was born. Bringing it back home, we heard our first speaker, Sheyi, this morning, give us an excellent narrative on the Kiriji War. And he said that the war was an economic war. It was, the spark for it was the need to collect taxes. And in the process of that tax collection, an insult was given to Fagoyi, which then led to the conflagration. I'm going to share with you a new perspective on the Kiriji War. And I start by sharing with you the state of Yoruba land in 1820s. This is the words of Hugh Clapperton, who we were told was an explorer, but those of us who studied the history now know that these were just part of the intelligence agents that were roaming our land, doing the reconnaissance ahead of the plan for colonization. And see what he said. I cannot omit bearing testimony to the singular and perhaps unprecedented fact that we have already traveled 60 miles in 80 days with numerous and heavy baggage and about 10 different relays of carriers without losing so much as the value of a shilling, public or private. A circumstance evincing not only somewhat more than common honesty in the inhabitants, but a degree of subordination and regular government which could not have been supposed to exist amongst the people hitherto considered barbarians. That was Hugh Clapperton. You see, we were told that we were barbarians. That was the narrative that they were running, that we were always killing ourselves. But see the evidence, a peaceful land, an honest land. But let's roll forward. I take this, the other narrative that has been run about us is that the Yoruba are, how do they say it? They are cowards. That's why we have no presence in the army. But look at this. this is from a book, Robert S. Smith, The Kingdoms of the Yoruba. And this is what he wrote, that the power of the Oyo continue to impress their neighbors is confirmed by what Robert Norris heard of them in Dahomey. And this is what he heard. The Dahomians may possibly exaggerate, but he's written Ayors, that is the Oyos, are certainly a very populous, warlike, and powerful nation. Now, let me take you through a very brief chronology of how Ibadan emerged as a military state and focus on the international dimension. So in 1807, we have the abolition of the slave trade. That was the act passed by the English Parliament to bring a trade that had been scouring our lands for 400 years, to bring it to an end. What happens next? Colonization of Sierra Leone. Now, students of history would appreciate the connection between Sierra Leone and the construction of Nigeria. This is where the Ajayi Crowthers came from. This is where the James, I've forgotten his middle name now, Payne, all came from. That was their training camp for those who had been so-called rescued from the slave trade. That was the place where they learnt our language, and in return, some of our returnees were schooled in their language. With what objective? With an eye on penetration, as you see as we move forward. 1817 was the Owu attack on Ife, which led to the siege of Owu land by the Oyo and the Ijebu in combination. The Egba sided with the Owu people, and both in consequence were destroyed. And the Allied army, the Ibadan army, now settled in what we now know as Ibadan. This was the former homeland of the Egba people. That was 1821. That was the origin and the seed of the repositioning of the Egba people in Abeokuta area, which you would know, those students of history would know that that became an important space for Christian missionary activities. 1830 was the Afonja episode in Ilorin, which the Fulani took advantage of to take that part of our land. 1840 is when the Fulani were defeated by the Ibadan army at Osogbo. So that is a short narrative that then tells us the picture of Ibadan as at 1840. And this is taken from not an Oyo man, it is taken from an Ekiti man. And those who understand the sides that were taken in the Kiriji War, which is Oyo and his allies against Ekiti, Parapo, i.e. Ekiti and his allies. So this is an Ekiti man, a professor of history, one of our leaders. In his book, Revolution and Power Politics, he said this: by the 1840s, Ibadan had evolved into an essentially military state. Qualification for chieftaincy title was usually decided by military prowess, not the rice and chicken plenty that we now use to determine who should be chief and who should be not. Chieftaincy titles were not hereditary. any man, regardless of his place of origin or his birth, could become a chief if he showed the requisite military capabilities and could rise by promotion to the leadership of the Ibadan state. Many adventurous men from all over Yoruba land migrated to Ibadan, there to seek the military honors which they could not hope to achieve in their own places of origin. So it was not just the people of Ibadan that were acquiring this military expertise. It was permeating across the country as people were sending their young people into the army. And then, of course, when we now wind forward to the construction of the Nigerian army, people were telling us that for some reason, our people did not want to go into the army because they were cowards. But look at the history. So again, we return to Professor Akintoye for this insight. He said, under the impact of Ibadan, the traditional military organization of the Ekiti and the Egesha had gradually undergone a change. There was imitation. We were always a people who love excellence. So when we saw, and other parts of Yoruba land saw, the excellence of the Ibadan Warriors, there was a natural inclination to imitate them. So the Ibadan military titles of Balogun, Otun, Osi, and Seriki, etc., made their appearance. The new system placed emphasis upon merit and made it possible to invest in new capable warriors with the responsibility of defense. So that was the picture. On the one side, Ibadan, with its acclaimed military excellence, and on the other side, Ekiti, that had learned the lessons, often directly from Ibadan itself. And people say we do not have a martial history. Well, let's look at the chronology again. The timeline to Kiriji War and Peace. 1833, abolition of the slavery. Let me emphasize the distinction between abolition of the slave trade, which was 1807, but slavery continued, and slavery itself was not abolished, at least by law, until 1833. On the back of that abolition exercise is when, in 1841, look at the timeline, 1841 was the Niger expedition. What was this about? This was when they were now looking to move into our lands, into the hinterland, because the naval patrols for abolition of the slave trade was, of course, on the coast. But now this was the move in, led by or assisted by the Sierra Leone contingents. 1845, this is the countdown to conflict in our land. 1845, Kosoko dethrones King Akitoye of Lagos. 1846 was the beginning of the Abeokuta CMS mission. And look at what then happens next. With that base in Abeokuta, power can now be projected to the bombardment of Lagos in 1851. 1860 is the war between Ibadan and Ijaye. 1861 is the formal colonization of Lagos. This is when the British move into Lagos and take that offshore base. Then we then have the beginning of the Kiriji War in 1870. And the war, 16 years, as you have heard, rolls on until 1886. Now, you've heard it said, that was arguably the longest civil war on record. 16 years of slaughter amongst our people. But where was the weaponry coming from? These are the questions we must ask ourselves. What set me off on this line of inquiry, looking for the external influence in this war, was a passage that I read in Samuel Johnson's History of the Yoruba, where he said that one of our great military commanders, Ogunmola, he died from not a bullet, not a machete, not a spear. He died from a blanket that was infected with smallpox. That immediately set my mind thinking about the smallpox and blankets that were used to kill off the Native American Indians in America. Then, of course, there was the Sniper rifles, very sophisticated weaponry that was being poured into this conflict. So I could see that foreign hands were changing the balance of power within Yoruba land, clearly with the object of colonization. Why do I say that? Here's the context. Yoruba land could never have been conquered by direct assault by the British or any other colonizing force because of the vegetation and afforestation. The British had been defeated in Haiti in 1794, 1795. Toussaint Louverture, a slave army, had defeated them. The vegetation and the environment and the geography was very, very similar, with the malaria factor in particular. So from that experience, there was no way that they were going to fight their way into our lands with a view to colonizing us. It had to be done by proxy wars. So when you look at the experience of other places, the picture then begins to form. Here's a passage from Professor Akintoye again. Far away in Lagos, returned emigres from Sierra Leone and the Americas, who were of Ekiti and Egesha origins, and a number of Egesha Ekiti men who, although captured and sold from their homes, had been fortunate enough to avoid being shipped away from Lagos, had formed themselves into an association called the Egesha Association as early as about 1852. They appear to have, by 1876, changed the name of their association to the Ekiti Parapor Society. It began in Lagos as a Christian group, holding weekly prayer meetings. So, as I said, the Sierra Leone factor, the returnees, what Professor Akintoye has called the emigres, a critical part of understanding the international dimension to what we thought was a civil war arising from an insult that had been inflicted by one party on the other. We're not unique. We're not unique in the experience of colonization. And when we seek to understand what happened in our own space, we must look abroad, look at the lessons of China, the process by which China was colonized by the European powers. Again, internal conflicts, proxy wars. Let's look at India. Those of students of history will understand how the East India Company, from its arrival off the coast of India, this narrative that then followed was one of conflict and civil war right across India. What about the Native American Indians? You remember all the wars between the various Indian tribal groups? What was that about, and how did it end? It all ended in colonization. And then, of course, we must never forget the Berlin Conference of 1884. Kiriji War was going on. At the time, they were sat in Berlin deciding how the place was going to be carved up between themselves. And remember the criteria that was applied in deciding who would get what, which part, which slice of the land or the continent will go to who. They had to demonstrate what is called effective occupation. You're not going to demonstrate effective occupation in 1884 by simply remaining in Lagos. You're going to have to demonstrate that you have presence in the mainland. So this is the important context to this Kiriji War, that we must. My only purpose here is just to tease the issues, but we must research, study, reflect on this much more critically. Because when we understand the true reasons for conflict between us, we will then get a better understanding of how we will build unity amongst us going forward. And so I look forward, I'll end it there. I could write a book on this issue, but time does not allow. I look forward to the question and answer session.
Thank you so much, Dele. I think that people that desire to move forward without the concept of history are people destined to be doomed. So I think I thank you very much for that. The slides that you have provided, I don't know if you want to share that with people going forward, but generally it really speaks to some of the not so obvious ways that the challenges that now face Yoruba, but the people and the nation. Some of these not so obvious ways that they have been able to penetrate and separate the nation and the people. But certainly we need to try and find ways that we can come together. And I've read some of the comments that a couple of people have sent on here. Notably, Samuel has said about the contribution of Mr. Akinwunton, basically talking about, we really need to engage more the youth. We need to bring a lot of history is good, and a lot of the context that we provided here around constitution, they are all very good. But now, what do they mean? How do they relate to the lives of the ordinary Yoruba person? What can we do as a people going forward? And in that light, it's 3 o'clock. I'm going to allow some time for questions and answers. Please, if you would like to ask a question, you can just raise your hands using the Zoom app, or you can send me a message on the chat, just saying that you want to ask a question. Beyond that, I would open the floor for questions now. So anyone who would like to ask a question, you can ask the question now. I have a number of questions to ask. So if nobody's ready, I will go. But if anyone is ready, please, the floor is yours. Anybody? Okay. Nobody? Oh, I can't. So I think people are speaking, but maybe their mics are muted. Your mic is muted. So let me. Can you?
Mute.
Okay.
Yes. Ẹ ṣeun olóòtú, ẹ̀yin méjèèjì tí ẹ pè wá papọ̀ síbí lẹ́nu. Inú mi dùn gangan ni o, bó ṣe máa rí ṣe. Nǹkan tí ó jẹ èmi lógún, òun ni ọ̀rọ̀ ìdè wa. Gẹ́gẹ́ bí ìyáàfin Olúkẹ́mi Àtijọ́sàn, gẹ́gẹ́ bí wọ́n ṣe sọ. Wọ́n ní èdè ṣe pàtàkì, ó ṣe kókó. gbogbo àwọn ìlú tí wọ́n wà ní ilé ayé yìí tí wọ́n ṣoríire tí wọ́n ti ní àǹfààní láti ṣe nǹkan mèremère bóyá ní gbogbo ibi tí àwọn èèyàn wọn nídìí ni o nípa ẹ̀kọ́ iléèwé ni o nípa oògùn nípa hospital ni o nípa gbogbo ẹ̀ṣá èdè yẹn gangan jẹ́ pàtàkì fún wọn ni wọ́n fi ráyè dúró. Ẹ rí i pé even Russia nígbà tí wọ́n break Russia gangan Russia àwọn tí wọ́n yìí jẹ́ satellite countries wọ́n sì ń sọ èdè yẹn sì ń jẹ́ pé kí Russia sì lè máa ní communication pẹ̀lú wọn. So mo wá fẹ́ fà wá sí ọ̀rọ̀ tí à ń sọ pé a fẹ́ gbòmìnira gẹ́gẹ́ bí àyòmọye àwọn èèyàn ti sọ pé àwọn tó ti sọ̀rọ̀ ń bí àti àwọn ọ̀jọ̀gbọ́n amòfin tí wọ́n ti bẹ̀rẹ̀ títí gbé ibi tí wọ́n gbé dé kò sí bá ṣe fẹ́ ṣe tí a bá bẹ̀rẹ̀ ní ká ṣe bí wọ́n ṣe ní kán ṣe kò lè rí bó ṣe fẹ́ rí. Question tí ti fẹ́ bèèrè lọ́wọ́ ìyáàfin ni wípé ọdún mélòó ló máa gbà wá ká tó bẹ̀rẹ̀ sí sọ Yorùbá gidi gan tá mọ̀ pé Yorùbá gangan nìkan ni gbogbo nǹkan wa la máa kọ nǹkan wa ní Yorùbá. Ọdún mélòó ló máa gbà? Ṣé tí a bá bẹ̀rẹ̀ sí sọ Yorùbá sìn tá a bẹ̀rẹ̀ sí kọ òfin wa ní Yorùbá tá à ń ṣe gbogbo nǹkan lóòfin ní Yorùbá ọdún mélòó ló máa gbà wá? Ẹ ṣé.
Sorry, máa sọ Yorùbá díẹ̀ máa wá fi òyìnbó sí nítorí ìkan náà àwọn tí wọ́n bá wa sọ̀rọ̀ lénìí wọn ò gbọ́ Yorùbá náà lọ tó gẹ́ so màá ní arábìnrin Olúkẹ́mi Àtijọ́sàn ṣé ẹ lè bá wa dáhùn ìbéèrè yẹn. Just for the benefit of one or two of our listeners who can't speak Yoruba particularly, Otumba has asked a few questions, but directed at Madam Olukemi Atijoson, just saying, look, how long will it take for us to establish the Yoruba language? Should we, even if we were to talk about the constitutional arrangement and all the things that we've been talking about, how long will it take to establish that? Thank you. And let me unmute you. Go on.
Ẹ ṣé gan ni. Nǹkan tẹ́ ẹ béèrè mi ò lè sọ pé iye ọdún báyìí ni ó máa tó, ṣùgbọ́n a lè sọ pé nítorí pé ó máa pẹ́ ká tó débi tá à ń lọ ká má bẹ̀rẹ̀. Nǹkan tó jẹ́ wàhálà gan fún àwa Yorùbá, àwa tá a wà nírìn àjò a sì ń ṣakitiyan káwọn ọmọ wa lè sọ èdè. Èyí tó bà mí lẹ́rù jù nínú ọ̀rọ̀ wa ni pé àwọn tó wà nílé, àwọn tó wà ní ìlú wa ní Nàìjíríà, gbogbo wọn òyìnbó náà fẹ́ kí ọmọ wọn máa sọ. Òyìnbó náà tí wọ́n ń sọ ọ̀pọ̀lọpọ̀ ẹ̀ kò bójú mu, ṣùgbọ́n àrùn rí mọ́ pé àwọn ọmọ wa láti sọ òyìnbó. Nǹkan tí a mọ̀ ni pé ní àwa tá a wà nírìn àjò, gbogbo àwọn ọmọ wa tán lè sọ èdè dáadáa, tán gbọ́ èdè wa, gbogbo wọn ní àti kọ́ èdè ní ilé ìwé wọn ó yá sí wọn lára nítorí pé wọ́n mọ ìdí èdè nǹkan tí wọ́n ń sọ. So nítorí náà a lè sọ pé ó máa pẹ́ ká má bẹ̀rẹ̀, à ń láti bẹ̀rẹ̀ níbì kan. Màá sọ ní èdè òyìnbó nǹkan tí mo sọ. What I'm saying is we cannot say that because it's going to take long for us to reestablish our language, we're not going to start. We have to start now. I think the biggest issue that we have and the biggest problem that we have is more of the people at home in Nigeria, much more than people in the diaspora. Many people in the diaspora, even the people who came from Nigeria to the diaspora, the first generation, who thought that it wasn't important for them to teach their children. Now we're having the next generation who know that they need to know their identity, and they're going back to learn and to teach the third generation of Yoruba children. So the first people we need to tackle are the people at home who need to recognize and understand that their language is their identity. This quest to want to speak English at home in Nigeria and not speak their own language in their own homes is something that we have got to deal with. We have got to re-educate the minds of our people that their language is their identity, and them speaking their language does not make them a second-class citizen. Here in the UK, it has been established again and again that young people or children who can speak their own mother tongue, they do better in school than children who don't understand their own language. Thank you.
Èmi á sọ pé and ohun mi kí n sọ Yorùbá gidi lórí ètò tá a wà yìí o, ṣùgbọ́n nígbà tí arábìnrin Akínwùntán ti sọ pé tí wọ́n bá ti rí orúkọ òun tí wọ́n máa kọ́kọ́ bí òun ní pé ṣé o lè sọ Yorùbá, òun á ní pé òun ò lè sọ, ṣùgbọ́n dùn òun pé wọn ò fi kọ́ òun. Èmi á ní pé ẹni tó bá fẹ́ sọ Yorùbá kó sọ, ṣùgbọ́n fún àǹfààní ti yẹ àti pé a fún ní ẹ̀tọ́ pé kó bá wa sọ̀rọ̀ lénìí náà, gẹ́gẹ́ bí ọ̀dọ́ èmi á try láti máa túmọ̀ fún tí n bá lè túmọ̀, má dẹ̀ tún sọ Gẹ̀ẹ́sì náà tí n bá lè sọ. So let me say I have traveled a bit and I've traveled quite wide. One thing that I have known and I've noticed is that I've been to China a few times, been to Brazil and all those places. When we go in official capacities, there is none of a member of any of the official delegations that speaks you English publicly. Even though they all attended Oxford and Cambridge, they can speak English very, very well. But when we are outside and you need to engage them, especially China and Brazil, we listen to the French, we listen to the Germans. They all officially speak either whether it's Dutch or French. And I think, Dele, if you remember, there was a time when we engaged Professor Sophie Oluwole of blessed memory now. And they carried out an experiment a while ago where they had a number of schools. And they said, look, we are going to teach these children with mother tongue. Whether it's in English, in maths, in geography, we're going to use their mother tongue to teach them. And the one thing they found with that experiment was that the students' ability, the engagement just went up the roof. It just went very high. Why? Because they didn't have to. I just take what you said before, Mrs. Atijoso. They did not have to first convert and translate English into their mother tongue in their head, and then try to regurgitate it again in English. So I think there's something to be said about how do we, as a people, begin to think about using and engaging ourselves in Yoruba even more. But I think there's a question I would like to ask of all the people who have spoken as well, which is about leadership. The Chinese can point to their leaders. They can say, this is the leader of the Chinese people. This is the leader of the the English or whatever. Who is the leader of the Yorubas? If we're saying that we're a people, we're a nation, who can we say? Because where there is no leadership, there is no direction. We can all gather here from now till another 20 years. Who can we say is the leader that we can look forward to? There are one or two that are very, very, we can even use the word corrupt, very politically or whichever way. They've lost direction of the Yoruba concept. And so how do we even begin to have that direction? Anybody can answer it, but let me start with maybe who was the person that spoke? Because you spoke more from a constitutional point of view. So how do we address? So if you can bring the leadership thing and add it to the language, how do we move forward with that? Let me unmute you. Let me see whether we can unmute you. Okay.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I will link the two because I actually wanted to talk about the language thing. Leadership is not a problem for us at all back at home. We know our leaders. We know the true and credible leaders, and we are following them. And I can tell you that if we have any means of cloning Babade Banjo and Baba Fashionati, we should do so. I mean, these are the leaders that the Yoruba will always be very safe and secured with. But it is not just about leadership. It's about followership. It's about the fact that followership went with Chief Obafemi Awolowo. Obafemi Awolowo was a provincial man from Ikere. He was not a Lagos man. He was not an Ibadan man. But he was able to unite the Yoruba. He went to the grassroots. He was able to talk to the people. But today, some pretenders, charlatans had used all other means that are not altruistic, all other means that are fraudulent, like using money, like using subterfuge and propaganda to tilt the movement towards them. And we have a problem now because of what some few people have done to derail us. But be that as it may, things are changing and changing fast, and the people have realized where they went wrong. And I can assure you that in a few months from now, we'll be saying something different about leadership. But let me stop there. I want to talk about the language thing. You guys that are in the UK and elsewhere, look at your neighbor that is an Indian. He wears, and she too wears, the sari and whatever the men from India wear. And in their homes, they speak their language. Their children speak their language. I think you should start from there. I think the idea is to make use of every means of communication to make sure that our children abroad do speak the language. When we speak the language here, it is still not enough, I will confess, because expression is in our language, and expression is what we need in teaching. And yes, the speaker was right when he said that when you use your native expression to offer instruction, you get better results. I know of an effort by a young man in the UK. He's an anthropologist. He's doing things. He goes by the name Olobe Nyonyo on Facebook. Nyonyo is a word that the Owo people use for something that is very sweet in terms of the delicacies that can be made from local soup of Owo people. Olobe Nyonyo, his real name is Olagoke. I would rather, my brother Dele and I, after this meeting, reach out to him to bring him in. He's been able to do so much, gathering some young men and women in Yoruba land to start translating even the most difficult of subjects, chemistry, physics, even mathematics into Yoruba. You won't believe it, but he's been doing that for about 4 years. I'm in close touch with him, and these things are yielding. I think the whole concept of translating everything in chemistry to Yoruba is ready. Physics is ready. They are working hard on mathematics. There's a young man in Ibadan called Bode Oje, who has written 2 books already on sci-fi, traveling to space, using Yoruba language. Just 2 weeks ago, Oyo State government approved one of the books, Ìrìnàjò sí ìlú Ayédìméjì, for the junior secondary 3. And the one that is the sequel will be the one that will start with senior secondary 1. And these are young men who are trying to change the narrative so that they can bring Yoruba back into the school, into the schools as a medium of instruction, so that we can have the totality of education represented in our own tongue, and we can take it to anywhere in the world, just like the Japanese would not in any way instruct their children in English. Just like even in Turkey, I have a friend who publishes books in Turkey. And he says that every means of communication in every class, from kindergarten to university in Turkey, is in Turkish language. We need to do things like that. Unfortunately, we are stifled. We are in a contraption that will not allow the Yoruba to actualize their potentials. And we could get out of this contraption so that we can fully actualize our potentials and be able to develop at the same pace with the rest of the world, using the simple strategy of our language to be able to achieve that. So that is what I'd like to say for now.
Well, thank you so much. Any other contributors, Dele or Sheyi, whoever it is that was a panel member?
Encourage some more contributions from the floor. I'm sure they are.
Do you have any other contributors? You can raise your hands or you can. Okay, please, can you unmute yourself? Oh, sorry. Can you unmute yourself, please?
Can you hear me now?
Okay, go on, yes.
Yes, thank you very much for this opportunity. Mama wa ejo edariji mi o ke je kin sọ èdè òyìnbó, èdè Gẹ̀ẹ́sì, so that àwọn èèyàn wa lè gbọ́ mi dáadáa. I'm very happy about this gathering. As far as leadership is concerned, I think we have to realize that right from the onset, the British behaved like the person who gives you the cow, but hands on to the rope, so that we were never actually given an opportunity to try and aspire for independence as a Yoruba nation. They even went as far as all their education, their means of government that they taught us. Everything was in English. And the idea was to turn us into little Englishmen. The government that came through the federal level obviously came in with this idea of reducing the structure for us to be able to have a Yoruba leader. Chief Awolowo was able to emerge because he was able to there was a structure that he was able to use to become a titular and effective leader of Yorubas in the region of the West. Now we've been broken into 6 states. Even here in Ondo State, we don't often agree with Osun State and Ekiti State. It's a design. And the reason why our language is so important and so reason for us to win that cultural battle. I so agree with Boyega about the Indians wearing their saris in England and still talking in their languages, but still they are part and parcel of the English community.
Yes.
You in the diaspora, at the end of the day, you are going to be the one that's going to emancipate Yoruba land. But you have to do just like the Indians are doing. We're seeing Indians and Pakistanis rising up to the level of members of parliament, rising up to the point of being ministers. You have to be as English as the English, but you must not lose your cultural heritage. Because we are afraid here. You can hear from my diction. I've been there, I've done that. But I chose to come back home, and I'm firmly back home now. My fear is that you in the diaspora, although you're going to develop the means to be able to emancipate us, you are going to lose your cultural identity. And it will simply be being recolonized by Yoruba English people. That's all I have to say for now. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you very much. Any other speaker, any other contributor? For those who, Boyega, I'm going to come to you very, very soon, Boyega. Anybody else? Otumba was saying, do you still want to speak? Let me ask to be unmuted.
Yes.
Okay, very quickly, please.
Yorùbá náà ni màá tún sọ nípa àti ní olórí òṣòro rí and kò sí wàhálà láti lé lórí ìgbà tí bàbá Ọbáfẹ́mi Awólọ́wọ̀ tó di olórí Yorùbá gbogbo àwọn Yorùbá ni wọ́n fi ara mọ́ aṣíwájú wọn. Ayò ní òtítọ́ gbogbo àwọn tí wọ́n ń káàkiri ìlú tó ń pera wọn ní òṣèlú ṣùgbọ́n òjèlú ni wọ́n, òun ló máa fi jẹ́ kí ó nira fún wa. So èmi rò pé àyòmọye wọn náà láti wá bí ní bá ṣe máa ra yọ wọ́n sẹ́yìn kábẹ̀sí fojú wo àwọn tí a ròyìn pé bóyá wọ́n fẹ́ ṣe òṣèlú fún wa tí kì í pé wọ́n fẹ́ jẹ òjèlú. Torí tá a bá ṣọ́ra à ń sọ lọ à ń sọ bọ̀ ń sìn nígbà tí a bá ti máa wò a fẹ́ yọra wa sí bí a fẹ́ yọra sọ́hùn èmi gbàgbọ́ wípé a ti ṣe gbogbo nǹkan tó yẹ ká ṣe tán láti sọ pé a fẹ́ bẹ̀rẹ̀ Odùduwà nation wa gẹ́gẹ́ bí àyèmọ́yé àwọn ọ̀jọ̀gbọ́n tí wọ́n sọ̀rọ̀ bí ilé ni ní sọ̀rọ̀ tán ẹni sọ pé àwọn preparation kan wà tó yẹ ká ṣe bàbá ti ṣàn preparation yẹn a sì lè wà láàrin Nàìjíríà ká dàbí California a sì wà láàrin Nàìjíríà ká dàbí ìlú tí yóò dàbí Dubai nǹkan kan bẹ́ẹ̀ wọ̀nyẹn so a kàn ní láti jẹ́ pé tá a bá rí olórí tó máa ṣíwájú ṣùgbọ́n gbogbo àwọn crops of leaders tá a ṣì nísìn èmi ò mọ̀ yìí tá a fẹ́ náwó sí tá a fẹ́ sọ pé ní ìlú lórí wa a sì lọ́kì a sì ní àwọn alàgbà díẹ̀ kan Ọlọ́run jẹ́ kí wọ́n pẹ́ kán wọ́n ti dàgbà Ọlọ́run jẹ́ kí wọ́n tún pẹ́ fún wa ṣùgbọ́n ó ní ìwọ̀nba jọ́nì tí wọ́n lè gbé wa gbà so láàrin ara wa à ń láti fi ara balẹ̀ kábẹ̀ sí ní láti jẹ́ pé ẹnìkan tó ń ti mọ̀ tẹ́lẹ̀ tá a bá ti rí láàrin pé eléyìí olóòótọ́ ni a lè bẹ̀rẹ̀ sí groom ẹ̀ kábẹ̀ sí tọ́pọ̀lẹ̀ lórí kábẹ̀ sọ pé eléyìí á dáa fún wa kò tí yẹn ti fẹ́ sọ nìyẹn mo dúpẹ́ lọ gbogbo yín o.
Ẹ ṣé gidi gan ni. Any other speaker? Did you want to say something, Bega?
Yes, I'd like to just make a reference to our young sister, daughter, who said something about royalty and their relevance, and perhaps what she would like to see as the kind of roles that our others should be playing in such a way as to impact positively. And, on the eve of the independence, a British journalist was interviewing Chief Obafemi Awolowo, and the question was, would Nigeria at the time become a republic? And Chief Obafemi Awolowo said emphatically, no, we will not wish Nigeria to be a republic. The difference is this: when you have republics, then you don't have kings, you don't have royalty, you don't have the traditional institution in the republic. That is just the basic truth. Chief Awolowo said rather Nigeria is a nation because those princes and traditional rulers were integral, they were very important to the struggle for independence and the processes leading to Nigeria gaining independence. So why throw them away? And that was why he created in the Old West the House of Chiefs, and a way for the people to be, for the kings to be incorporated. There was a problem in Akure when they were going to do free education, and it was like it was not gaining ground. The people didn't want free education. I'm happy Sister Dr. Mrs. Awolowo Dosumu is here because she knows this story. What Papa Awolowo did was to go straight to the Deji of Akure to explain the situation, and the Deji called everybody in the town and said, we are going for free education, and that was it. That was how important the Deji was to Papa Obafemi Awolowo's free education program. And all of that, of course, would be necessary in the new Yoruba constitution or the new Yoruba nation. We will need to revisit the importance of the traditional institutions so that we can make use of this Oba, so that they will not continue to be just salaried men under local government chairmen.
Yes.
And that is just who they are. It is the local government chairman that pay them. And what do they pay them?
Thank you so much, sir. And I think just to extend your thoughts there, it's very important to understand that if you look at the North, the role of the Sultan of Sokoto as the sort of emir, as well as the person who is known within the whole of the North as the head of the religious side as well. So not only is he the emir, but he holds the pot of Islam within that. So whatever he says, there is nobody, whether you are the president or governor, if you're in the North, if the Sultan of Sokoto says this is direction of travel, that is it. They don't question that. Now, the way that we used to be, where we had our traditional rulers and if you call it our traditional religions, okay, our traditional rulers had roles to play when we had to go and do those rites, those traditional rites. But by finding a way of decimating and making you feel that those are not necessary anymore, what you have done is you have curtailed the powers of your tradition because they are not necessary anymore. They are not needed anymore. Those roles have been usurped into, I'm sorry to say, into our churches and our mosques in a way. But I'm sure that somehow we will find a way forward. But you're very correct in your expressions there that the role of our traditional rulers, we must find a way where the Ooni of Ife, what is his rightful place now? There's nothing he can say now that I'm sorry, that bears as much weight as the governor of a state. Because he's paid by the state. During elections, they'll consult him and they'll seek him because they know he can speak to one or two people. But after election, they're the ones that actually oversee his affairs. So I think those are things that are very, very important. I don't know, as a nation, the Yoruba nation, how do we make sure that our obas and our leaders are given the rightful position within the? If you look at the Fulanis, I would say I'll keep going back to that. The Sharia as a principle, the basis of it is in the belief structure, and it's embedded and upheld by the person who holds the Islamic rights and the religion in his hands, and that is Sardana. So I think there's a way that we have to make sure that if there's anything we want to do as a people, I don't know how we will do it, the design. So the design of our leadership is so critical to the way that we advance the cause of the Yoruba nation. Sorry, Mrs. Ati Johnson.
Yes, I just wanted to say that from what I observed when I was very young and obviously what you read about before the British came, we had our system of government. And our traditional rulers were paramount. They control the people. We have our system of kingship and chieftaincy and all of that. I think one of the critical problems that we have in modern day Yoruba nation is because the people who now become chiefs and all of these people, they're not people of integrity that you want to follow. I think if we return to our traditional values, where for somebody to become a chief, for somebody to become a leader, even within their own area, it has to be because of their integrity, not because they can bring some money and all of these things. Because if you look at the recent events in Benin, when the Oba called the two candidates and read riot acts to them, the people of Benin believe in their Oba than anybody else. So we have to find a way to revive our traditional values in order for us to get to that place where leadership emerges. And if the construct that we currently have is returning to our traditional leaders, where the traditional leaders then have a leader amongst them, then we will find our way back. We have got to get away from the construct that has been handed over to us through colonialism and all this nonsense that we practice now and call government.
Thank you very much. Any final thoughts? Anyone? Dayo Ferdinand. Okay. You can unmute yourself and you can speak, please.
Oh, good afternoon, everyone. And this is a brilliant way of actually discussing the problems we are having in Yoruba land. And I thank the organizers for actually putting this together. Now, I also want to come back to the issue of leadership, within Yoruba land. I believe that the power of leadership will always flow from the consensus of the majority of the people within that very particular geographical frame, wherever you want to actually talk about. And I've been following the issue of leadership in Nigeria, particularly in Yoruba land, for well over about 30 years. And I've come to one conclusion that cannot be disputed in any form or in any way. The leadership in Yoruba land today is so corrupted and so contaminated politically that we find it very, very difficult to hold down a very, very good leader who would be able to lead the Yoruba people. Gone were the times of Awolowo, late Awolowo, and so many leaders of this type, the Bola Iges and all the rest of them, who are running the affairs of Yoruba, the Yoruba nation in those days. But the way things are going today, I'm afraid that the type of leaders we have today, I would not want to mention names, but we know at least two major leaders that have actually led the Yoruba people astray today. And you then start questioning what the followership of those kind of leaders. One is in Lagos and a few of them are in other parts of the Yoruba land. And you then start questioning the integrity of the majority of Yorubas who would, that person would say, look, I want you to vote for this type of person. Whether you like this person or not, you need to vote for this man or this woman. And what do the Yorubas do on ground? They vote en masse for that kind of person who we know is so corrupt, so contaminated. And this has been going on for well over about 30 years. So you then wonder, could it also be a question of followership, a question of what the integrity of our people, the Yorubas, to a point where instead of them actually choosing that right leader that they think could at least lead them to the promised land and put them on the path of progress, they will rather want to vote for people who indeed have caused so much destruction and disaster to Yoruba land. That's my take on the Yoruba leadership perspective. And I also want to mention the young lady who was on, who actually presented the paper. Olamide, that's it. To do with how we should do our bit and our best, to inform and to educate and enlighten them in terms of how they could be very useful for the future Yorubas and future Yoruba land. She made a very, very good point that she, as far as she's concerned, the likes of the Oni of Ife and so many of our others, who they don't particularly have any more relevance. And she posed that question of what importance are these people to me, the younger generation. I think we should pause on that very particular question and find a very, very good way of putting, heads together, minds together, to see how we could make use of these traditional rulers and good politicians, for that matter, to make a very, very good case for the Yoruba land.
Thank you so much. Okay, I mean, we have we've been going on for about just 2 hours, and unless anyone has any last or final words, I'd like to just hand over I'd like to say thank you to everyone first for accommodating the time to be here and to listen to these very, very insightful papers delivered. But I'd like to hand over to Dele to say the final words and vote of thanks. Thank you.
Judith, can I thank you so much for comparing the events so expertly and professionally. It really is a testimony to the pedigree of our people, the way you've conducted the exercise. And also too, can I thank each of the speakers who have taken time out to prepare their papers at very short notice. We only decided on this event a week ago, and they dropped everything for the sake of their and the future of our people. And what fantastic papers we have listened to in the course of the last 2 hours. As I said at the beginning, the Yoruba Foundation has been organizing Yoruba National Day events since the year 2000. But I have to say that of all the events that we've organized, that this is the one that has filled me with the greatest satisfaction. We've had the, typically our events, people come in, Owambe events, they wear the, they eat the pounded jam, they dance after the event, and it doesn't go beyond that. This one we have not danced, we have not eaten, we have reflected, and that has given me so much more satisfaction than the 150, 200 people turning out for a dinner dance. It is a beginning of a discussion, it's a beginning of a dialogue, it is a beginning of us engaging with the pressing issues of the moment, at bringing our thinkers together of all generations. You heard it today, you heard the youngest, you also heard from the grey-haired, and together we begin to understand the way forward. And what I've taken from all of this discussion is this, and it was actually Olamide's point that registered most powerfully with me, which is this, our traditional rulers, what relevance do they have for the next generation who are her generation? And also understanding the roles that they used to have as compared to the roles that they play now. And that convinces me that the way forward for our people is actually the way back. It's not more complicated than that. We simply have to retrace our steps to when we were glorious and when we were good and when we were powerful and when we were respected. We have lost our way, and anybody who's on a journey who has lost their way and doesn't know the way forward, simplest thing is trace your steps back until you get back into an environment and a setting which is truly yours. So I want to thank everybody. Those who are not familiar with the Yoruba Foundation, my email is very easy, dele@ogun.com. It's as simple as that, dele@ogun.com. Email me, keep in touch. Wish you a joyous anniversary as we celebrate the Yoruba National Day. Again, Jide, thank you. Ben Television, thank you. Everybody out there, because it's not just the people here on the platform, it's been streamed live on YouTube, so you'll get a chance to watch it again at your leisure. Thank you all very much as we sign off. Thank you. See you next year.